All right, we are live on YouTube and we'll let people in. Good evening, folks. If you're just signing in, this is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. If that's what you're looking for, you found the right place. It takes a few minutes for people to actually come in, so we'll wait a couple minutes at the top, but welcome everybody. Just letting folks in. This is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. If that's what you're looking for, you found the right place. Welcome. Just letting people in. Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. Welcome, everyone. This is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. If that's what you're looking for, you found the right place. On Zoom, it takes a few minutes to let everybody in, so we're just waiting. But welcome to those of you who've signed in. We'll get started in just a moment. Get started as soon as the next person joins. And if that person doesn't join, we'll never start. Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Losak. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. We are the first and only regional nonprofit dedicated exclusively to renter outreach, education, organizing, and advocacy. We were founded in 2010 at the recommendation of the Tenants Work Group from Montgomery County. At that time, there was a belief that renters needed an organized voice in public affairs, and we're it. So welcome to all of you. With us this evening is the manager of the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, Rosie Mcrae Moody, and the director of an SE. What does SE stand for? I know the Prevent Homelessness part.
Services to end and prevent homelessness.
Services to end and prevent homelessness. That's the director, Amanda Harris. Before we get started with program information from county officials here with us tonight, I want to tell everybody about the status of the bill to extend the emergency rent stabilization in Montgomery County. Back in 2020, Council Member Will Jawando proposed a bill that passed unanimously by the council to cap rents within the county's voluntary rent increase guidelines. When it was originally passed, that was at 2.6%, but as of last February, it's at 1.4%. That legislation protection, which requires all rents in Montgomery County increases to be within those guidelines, that protection will end November 15th unless the county council passes the extension. They have twice now delayed a vote on that bill. It was supposed to be voted on last Tuesday. They decided to delay it another week, and now it's scheduled to be voted on Tuesday. The position of the Renters Alliance is that we want the original bill which was proposed by Councilmember Jawando, and actually with the support now of Councilmember Evan Glass and Councilmember Hans Reamer, with an amendment, would eliminate late fees and continue the cap on rent increases at 1.4% for 9 months, that is through this August. The reason for that is that there is no longer a eviction protection order by the governor of the state of Maryland, and there is no longer an eviction protection order from the Centers for Disease Control. So renters are completely exposed if they're still behind in their rent or struggling with their rent. We are still in a pandemic. The impact of the pandemic on working families in particular, those especially in low incomes who work in retail and restaurants, in the service industries, the economy hasn't caught up to them yet. Many of them are still behind in their rent. Amanda Harris is with us this evening. We'll talk about the rent relief program, but we know, working together with the county, that there are many thousands of renters in our county, one of the wealthiest counties in the world, by the way, who are still behind in their rent, facing eviction, and have not yet even applied for this rent relief program. So there's a great vulnerability out there in the renter communities. Now is not the time to allow rents to be raised beyond what we consider an amount that keeps up with inflation so that landlords can keep up with their rising overhead. Now is not the time to increase profits. So that's the belief of the Renters Alliance. That's what we support. And we urge all of you who are listening to support it too. And the only way this kind of legislation gets passed is when elected officials whose stock and trade is measuring the will of the people and whether or not they're going to vote one way or the other is to hear from you. So I'll put in the chat the contact information for the county council, but I urge all of you to call your council member and express your support for extending this emergency rent cap bill, rent stabilization bill. We've had it for almost a year already, despite the warnings of the landlord industry and their allies that the sky would fall and the Russians would invade and they would all move out of the county with their apartment buildings and there would be no place for anybody to live here anymore. None of that happened. Everybody was still doing okay. It's true. There are some smaller landlords who are struggling alongside renters who are also struggling. We know that. But the majority of landlords and the vast majority, in fact, all of the major corporate landlords have actually done very well during this pandemic. Why? Well, for one reason, turnover rates have been very low. Turnover is very expensive for landlords. When an apartment stays empty for 2 or 3 months, that's 3 months without rent. So people not moving and being told to stay in their apartments and stay stable because unstable rental housing, unstable housing in general leads to virus spread. So people obeyed that. People stayed in their apartments. Responsible landlords did not push anybody out. They tried to keep people as stable as possible. So that was one reason why landlords didn't have certain costs that they normally have. Another is that larger landlords or corporate landlords or business landlords were able to avail themselves of the payroll protection program, federal government subsidies, to make sure that their staffs were getting paid even if rents were not being collected. And they could establish those losses and ask for loans that were forgiven. So essentially a grant to cover their losses. The other is that there are mortgage assistance that came in for large corporations that own properties. So that also helped. And then there was deferred maintenance. Because unfortunately, because of COVID, maintenance was not, even code inspecting, as Rosie Mcrae Moody will talk about, we're not able to go apartment to apartment and go into apartments because we wanted everybody to stay socially distanced and not transmit this virus. So all of those things together led to a kind of a windfall for a lot of corporate landlords. Alongside all of this, pandemic aside, there is increasing demand for rental housing, especially in our area, in the Washington, D.C. area and other large market areas, New York, San Francisco, Seattle, Houston, Miami. These places have high demand. And so the rising value of apartment communities for where there is turnover and where there are new renters has also meant increased profits for landlords. So all of this is to say that this is not a time to help those who don't need the help. It is a time to help those who still need the help. And that is our working class and struggling renters. There is some pushback on the legislation that why should we help wealthy renters who are paying $3,000, $5,000, and $7,000 a month in rent? Well, you know, if there was an easy way to say that rich people shouldn't benefit from a policy that helps the vast majority of people who are working class, they'd probably do it. But there's no easy way to do it. The easy way is to extend the legislation for everybody, and that those renters who are able to pay those kinds of rents, okay, so they get a little bit of benefit that they're not going to see their rents go up 3, 5, or 10%. But I do think that knowing those renters too, and they only represent less than 6% of all of renters in Montgomery County, just keep that in mind, that many of them are also retirees. They may have done well. There may be 2 of them who are working, and now they've retired and they sold their house and they moved into a nice, expensive apartment and they hope to live there for the rest of their lives, but they can't afford to have their rents going up 5, 8, and 10% either. Their housing is important to them and staying stable is important to them, especially if they're senior citizens. So we think at the Renters Alliance that this legislation is important. We think it needs to be extended. I will say that we'd like to see it extended permanently, but that's a discussion for a different time. But at least from an emergency standpoint, it makes good policy during a time of a pandemic that is not over yet. So with that, let me turn to our first guest, Amanda Harris, who is heading up the program that provides rental assistance for renters who have been impacted by COVID. And Amanda, you're on.
Great. Thank you, Matt. And good evening, everyone. Happy to be here. So I'm going to share some information about the COVID rent relief program and then just give you some high-level status updates on where we are. I think the major point that I want to drill home is that there is still funding available. There's plenty of funding available. So if you have not applied, please, please, please do so. We want to be able to assist you and to make sure that you're able to stay in your home. So the COVID rent relief program, this current round is being funded through the Department of Treasury. It's federal dollars, so it is a federal program, so there are some requirements. The county has done its best to make those requirements minimal. The documentation is pretty minimal. So to be eligible for this program, you need to have been a resident in Montgomery County since August of 2020. It doesn't matter if you moved to a different place within the county, as long as you've been in the county since August of 2020. This program is for households with incomes that are at or below 50% area median income. So for a household of 1, that's around $45,000 annually. For a household of 4, it's $64,500. So that's the annual salary. You also must owe at least $1,000 in rent. Part of the Treasury requirement is that you can demonstrate that you are at risk of losing your housing. So this is the way that we determine that you are at risk of losing your housing, is that you owe at least $1,000. And then lastly, you must be able to show that you have a COVID-related financial hardship. So that can be a number of different things. You could have lost your job because of COVID or had reduced hours. Maybe you contracted COVID and you were in the hospital for a period of time, so you lost work. You could have had a family member that got COVID, or maybe a family member got COVID and unfortunately passed away. That would be considered a COVID financial hardship. If you needed to stay home because your kids were doing virtual learning for a period of time, that would also qualify as a financial hardship. And the way we ask you to document that is really just a self-attestation. So on the application, it asks you a number of questions, and then it asks you to just write a brief narrative explaining your situation. So you don't have to provide proof. We're not asking for a letter from your employer or from the school. It's really just you need to provide some information or description of what happened. The same goes for the income. So if you have income documentation, that's great. If you don't have any income right now, you're out of work, you have no income, or maybe you're just doing some side jobs, nothing official, you can also self-attest to your income. And there is a form on our website that allows you to do that. Let's see what else. If you are receiving unemployment benefits, if you can provide documentation of that, that would be great, because then you don't have to do anything else for your COVID-related financial hardship. Just being on unemployment would qualify you for the program. We serve immigration status is not a factor, so any resident in the county, any tenant, any renter is in fact eligible if they meet this other eligibility criteria. You do not have to be in a formal housing situation, so you could be in an informal housing relationship. Maybe you're renting a room, maybe you have a roommate, but it's not an official you're not officially subleasing. You would still be eligible for the program. The program provides up to $12,000 in arrears, so past rent, and 3 months of future rent. If you are a household that is extremely low income, so you are making 30% area median income or below, for a household of 1, that's around $27,000 annually. For a household of 4, that's $38,700. So if your income is below that, there's actually no cap on the dollar amount of arrears. So we can pay more than $12,000. So if you have not been able to pay rent really since the beginning of the pandemic, we can cover a large portion of your arrears. Unfortunately, with Treasury, we can only pay 12 months of arrears and 3 months of prospective or future rent. But if you are extremely low income, you are eligible to receive an additional benefit. That does come with, we ask the landlord for some concessions if we are going to pay more than the $12,000. So we do ask that our landlords agree to write off 10% of your rent arrears. They also, for any landlord receiving this benefit, cannot evict you while you are receiving this benefit. So if we are paying 3 months of future rent, they cannot file for eviction during those 3 months. We also ask that they renew your lease. We know that a lot of households are not evicted for non-payment of rent, but the landlord simply chooses to not renew the lease, and you're out of luck and you have no defense.
Renew the lease for how long, Amanda?
90 days. 90 days. Yes, we wish it was longer. This is what we could get people to agree to. Let's see. We can also, if you have already left your unit and maybe you're staying with a relative or staying with friends right now, you haven't been able to find additional housing, but you still meet the criteria, we can also provide assistance with relocation. So we can, if you find a new unit, we can provide first month's rent, security deposit, and then an additional 2 months of rent. And I think those are the high levels. That's how it works. And you would apply online. I think Matt probably posted that in the chat box. If you have technology issues or language issues or literacy issues, you can also call 311 and someone will call you back and help you through the application process. It's a 2-stage application. So the first part is just a pre-screening. So once you complete, there's like maybe 4 questions that it asks you. You do need to go in and finish the rest of the application. That pre-screening that's just the beginning, and then there's a larger application to complete. It is available in 7 different languages, including English. And we also have our partner agencies, including Renters Alliance, our housing counseling agencies that can also provide assistance with applying for the program. If you are not sure if you're eligible, I would encourage you to apply. We can help determine if you're eligible or not. Even if you are not eligible for this particular program, we do have other programs within Services to End and Prevent Homelessness that you may be eligible for. So we We do eviction prevention regardless of COVID financial hardship. We offer utility assistance, assistance with relocation. We also have burial assistance. And then within the larger HHS, Health and Human Services program, there's lots of different resources available, including medical assistance, food stamps, temporary cash assistance. And so by calling 311, we can connect you to those resources. I think I hit all the high level. We do, for those of you that have already applied and you have not received, your case status hasn't changed or you haven't gotten the assistance yet, I know it's painfully slow. We have received over 9,000 unique applications and around 15,000 total applications because some people are applying multiple times. This is not a lottery. It's not a first come, first serve. So applying multiple times does not increase your chances of getting assistance. The important thing to know, if you have already applied and you haven't heard anything back, you can check your status online. And as long as your status does not say denied, we still have funding available and you are in the queue and we will absolutely get to you. In the event that your status has changed, so maybe your landlord is now tired of waiting and they have actually filed for eviction and you have a court notice, you can notify us and then we will pull your application and prioritize that. So you can do that by calling 311. You can email us at hss@montgomerycountymd.gov. And we will notify the caseworker and we'll pull that case for processing. We are prioritizing households that have an eviction notice or are scheduled for an eviction. We are prioritizing households that are living in our high need census tracts. So these are areas that, based on a data analysis, we have determined to have residents that are most likely to experience homelessness. And then also we're prioritizing households who have been unemployed for 90 days. They're not the only people that are receiving the benefits. So it's about 60% of our cases each week are coming from those priority areas. And then another about 40% don't have to meet any of those priorities. So we're trying to go as fast as we can. We just are asking for your patience, and we encourage you to stay in your unit. If you leave, you are at risk of not getting as much assistance. So if you do leave, we can help with relocation, but we can't really pay for arrears once you have vacated the unit. So it's to your advantage to stay. And I know that landlords can be really pushy and they might be sending you letters saying, I'm going to evict, or you have to be out by X, Y, by a certain time. They actually can't do that. They have to go through the court process. So you do have rights. And we encourage you to exercise those rights and stay in your unit. And Rosie, I'm sure, can speak more to your rights as a tenant. Yeah, I think that's it. So as of today, we have already distributed a total of $50 million in COVID rent relief. We've served around 8,000 households already. We do have more funding available. As I said, Treasury required us to spend at least 65% of our allocation, or we were at risk of losing funding. And we actually met that and we exceeded that. And so now we are eligible to receive additional funds. So it's likely that we will have, at an estimate, another $50, $60 million coming to the county to be available for rent relief. So we do have funding. Apply. That's the message.
And and thank you, Amanda. And if I may add also, if you don't need it, but you know somebody else who does, please alert them to this program. Be a good neighbor. We want, our slogan, the Red Alliance, is building community. We want a community in your building, and we want to build community. And part of the way we do that, you know a neighbor who's struggling. Maybe they don't speak English. Maybe they don't understand the culture. Maybe they're just working 2 jobs, trying to make ends meet. Maybe they just don't understand. Maybe they're just not aware of the program. For whatever it is, we have to help each other and guide each other to these programs. The Renters Alliance is here also to help and to help navigate these things, as with our partners, HIP, CASA, Latin Economic Development Corporation, I think, and other folks who are working in this area. We help break log jams. We help disputes. We help you understand what your rights and responsibilities are. And we ask you to contact us early. Don't wait till things get really bad. If you, Ms. Harris asked you to contact HHS if you think that your situation is getting worse. So understand the difference. You know you're behind in your rent and your landlord says they want the money. Fine. We hope that you've applied immediately for the rent relief program through HHS. Then your landlord sends you a nasty letter, or the lawyer for the landlord says, we want you out in 8 days. Well, they can't do that. They can send you a threatening letter, but they can't get you out in 8 days. They have to take you to court, and that will take some time. Then you receive a court summons. So the court summons says you have to be in court on a certain day. And as Rosie and Amanda will all of us say together in harmony, please go to court. But you go to court, and then if there's a judgment against you because you have not paid your rent, then the landlord will have to file what's known as a writ of restitution. That is, the landlord wants now to take possession of your home. Then that, once it's signed by the judge, goes to the sheriff's department. And then the sheriff's department will put what's called a red and white notice on your door. HHS is saying if you've applied for rent relief and you haven't received that check, and you've moved along in this process to a more serious level, which is a court summons and God forbid, a sheriff's notice on your door saying an eviction is imminent, you need to let them know because they will prioritize your rent relief application. Now, we'd like them to prioritize it before they first receive that application, but they are working within their capacity, and that's the way they're doing business. But they can't prioritize you if they don't hear from you. So we urge you to please keep tabs on this. If you don't understand it, you want someone to help walk you through it a little bit, that's what we're here for. I'm going to put the Renters Alliance contact information in the chat, and contact us at any time on any of these questions, and we'll help you navigate. And let me also just say for the town hall tonight, if you have questions or concerns, please put them in the chat. We will answer all of them as we go along. And if there are questions that don't get answered tonight that you still have, you can email me at this email that is now in the chat, and we will follow up with you. So Amanda, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Nope, I see there's a lot of questions. I will get in the chat and in the Q&A and start responding to those questions.
Very good. Then thank you, and we may circle back to you, but we will go to now Rosie Mcrae Moody, who is the manager of the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs and representing the Department of Housing and Community Affairs tonight. Rosie?
Hello, everybody. Tonight I am DHCA. Usually Mr. Mcrae is here, the deputy director for the department, but you know, he had family issues and he's not available. And usually King Newsom is here for code enforcement, but he too had previous engagements, so he's not here. So I'm it. I wanted to go over what Matt talked about, which is the emergency legislation to extend the rent control bill for another 9 months. Right now, the amendment on the table is for those making 50% of AMI or less to keep it down to rent increases to 0. However, that has become kind of troublesome. How do you determine it? Who makes it? You know, who determines it? Do you have to confirm it? It has become troublesome, so they're working on amendments for it, but it goes to council Tuesday. So we'll see what happens. I wish I could tell you more about it, but we really don't know. And
if it doesn't pass, Rosie,
If it,
Where do
I'm
we,
gonna get to that. So we agree with Matt that is the easiest thing to do is extend what's already in existence. It's quick, it's simple, it's clean, but we are not in charge. If they do not pass anything, which is highly unlikely, they will pass something, but if they do not pass anything, come November 15th, which is the expiration of the original bill, landlords will be able to give you a 90-day notice and raise rents as they see fit. So that's why there's an urgency to getting something passed next week. So, you know, stay in tune, pay attention to your council people or whatever, and let them know you're concerned about it.
so if you've received a renewal notice before November 15th, since last year, it needs to have been within the county's voluntary rent increase guidelines,
Yeah.
which was 2.6% until last February. And so if you got a renewal notice
If you
before
got it
last
this year,
February,
1.4%. If
and
you
now
got it
it's
after February
1.4%.
4th, 2021, it can't exceed 1.4%.
So if you got an increase that's above that, we want to know about it because that was illegal. There are remedies for that that could be very important to you. If you're offered a lease now, this is Renter's Alliance talking, but our advice is if you want to stay in your home and you're offered a renewal notice, one of the laws that we got passed in 2016 requires a landlord to offer you a 2-year lease option. If that 2-year lease option is offered to you before November 15th, it can't be above 1.4% for either year. Take advantage of it. We don't know what the renewal, if the bill passes, we don't know what the voluntary rent increase guidelines are going to be this February. They could rise. We really don't know. So keep in mind what your rights are and what your options are and what your strategy is for keeping your rents down. And let us know if you got an increase above that in the last year or so.
Also, if your landlord doesn't offer you a 2-year lease, he has to give you a written explanation as to why not. So don't just let him say we're not doing it, because that doesn't mean anything. He has to tell you in writing why, and you have the right to challenge it.
And the most common reasons for that are?
Generally, it may be some program you're in, like, you know, if you are in a home program or something that is subsidized by HUD, they issue their own notice of rent increase. And so the landlord has to comply with HUD because HUD supersedes us. But otherwise, you know, if it's not a program if it's not something that is program directed, they have to comply with the 1.4%.
And usually if you have to certify your income on an annual basis.
Yeah, so and that's a reason why they cannot offer you a 2-year lease, but they still have to put it in writing. If you are a HOC tenant and you have to certify every year, or you're a tax credit tenant and you have to certify every year, they can't give you a 2-year lease because they don't know whether you'll be qualified next year. And they just have to put that in writing, and that's a real reason, and it's sufficient. And sometimes, especially in single families, maybe the landlord intends to sell a property, and they have to put that in writing too. Okay. I think we're going. The law passed as if the state passed the law effective October 1st, that if the landlord wants to take you to court for failure to pay rent, he has to issue you a notice of intent to file summary ejectment. That's the name across the front of the form. And it's kind of freaking people out because it is a court note, it is a court form, and it looks like they're getting ready to evict you, but they're not. It's not an eviction notice. It's just a warning. It says, if you don't pay within 10 days of getting this, we're going to take you to court and sue you for failure to pay rent. That's all it is. And it tells you your rights under the law. So please don't get too freaked out if you get a notice of intent to file summary ejectment, because all it is a warning that if you don't pay in 10 days, we're going to take you to court and file failure to pay rent. Because we've gotten a few calls about that, and that's all it is. It looks kind of intimidating, but it's really just a warning, and it does have your rights on it. So read the form. It actually has some useful information. The district court has a help center, which is manned by attorneys. And they're there every day between 8:30, is it 8 to 4 or 8:30 to 4:30? But there's an attorney on duty every day. Go to the help center and they can answer your questions. They cannot go into court with you, but they can answer your questions and give you pointers on what you can and cannot do when you get in there. Call legal aid. Maryland legal aid is available. The homeless persons representation project.
Correct.
Yeah, those lawyers are around. Call. Go to our website. They have numbers for all of this. Legal aid, homeless persons representation project, the Maryland Help Center of the district court. And they also have numbers and contact information for Renters Alliance, CASA, LEDC, and HIP. And those organizations can help you if you want to file for rental assistance and you need assistance navigating the process. They're available to walk you through. And please be patient. As Amanda said, they have thousands of applications and they're working as fast as they can. And they've actually gotten faster over time, although it may not seem so. But be patient and keep checking. And if you get something that says you're denied, it's probably because they tried to contact you and they couldn't get you. So if you get that call, if you get that email, please answer, because they don't, they have a lot of applications, so they don't have time to keep calling you and calling you and calling you. If you get the call, answer it. If you get the email, answer it. Stay in touch with your worker, because that's how you get denied, just because they couldn't get in touch with you sometimes, and so they have to move on. Your application will still be.
Let me throw in
worked
2
on.
points, Rosie. One, and Amanda, if you can address this. If you receive a letter that says your case is closed, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're denied aid because you don't qualify. It could mean that we just haven't heard from you, so we've set your file aside because we need to work on those people that are working with us, and so we can move the money out the door. But renters should know that if they're in the system and they suddenly get back from the hospital or from the trip to see the grandmother, or they just found the notice or whatever, or a call, they're checking their messages, that they can get back in touch with you and reopen their case?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, and
Right.
Most of those letters should have contact information for your actual caseworker. And the best way to do it is you just reach out, excuse me, directly to the caseworker.
And the other thing I want to say about the 10-day notice that Rosie Mcrae Moody was talking about, that's something that the Renters Alliance, as a co-founder of Renters United Maryland, pushed for. It used to be that you could get a summons from a landlord that says you got to be in court, from the court that says you got to be in court the next day. So this says that a landlord has to warn you that in 10 days, they're going to file for that summons. So it's supposed to give you a little bit of lead time so that you can go down and say what's going on, call a lawyer, call the Renters Alliance, contact the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs and say, look, something's wrong here, or apply for rent relief, whatever, but it gives you a little bit of time to breathe. So in that sense, it's a good thing. But as Rosie points out, the document itself is a little scary, and it looks like they're coming to bang down your door. It's not. It's just a 10-day notice that the landlord is now required to give you that says we're gonna file for eviction, file in the court in 10 days.
And the landlord sometimes tries to take advantage of it because it does look sort of scary. So they'll give you that notice of intent to file summary ejectment, and then they'll put a little letter with it saying, if you don't pay in 10 days, you get out. No, don't do that. You do not have to get out. You can only be evicted by court order. So if you haven't been to court, if no judgment was ordered and the sheriff is not there, you do not have to leave. So don't let them intimidate you. It's just a warning. That's all it is. I'm going to say the same thing that Amanda said and Max said. If you get a summons, go to court, because you have no defense. If you don't go, you lose automatically. And there may be things that can help you. It's not a lot. The protections that used to be in place are gone, but there are still things you can do. If you're sued for tenant holding over, that's a hard one because there is no, you don't have to have a reason. The landlord doesn't have to have a reason to tell you to leave.
You might want to explain what that is, Rosie.
What?
Tenant holding over.
Tenant holding over means they gave you, the landlord gave you, it's the end of your lease, the lease is ending, and the landlord gave you notice to vacate, and then you didn't go. So he can take you to court and file tenant holding over. And there are not a lot of defenses for it. The only thing you can really do, you can try to plead retaliation, but if you plead retaliation, you cannot be in arrears because then you have no case. They won't hear it. And the law says that you can't file retaliation if you owe money, if you owe rent. So.
And you have to have proof of it.
Yeah, so you definitely make use of the Maryland Help Center in the court and talk to an attorney. They're there and they're happy to help you. And please, please, please file for the money. There's a lot of money out there and they want to give it to you. So just apply and don't decide for yourself that you don't qualify because you don't know. Because most people do qualify. So please apply. Because even if you don't apply, even if you don't qualify for the 12,000, you probably are qualified for something else. So apply.
Yeah.
And
That's right.
go ahead.
Sorry, Rosie. I did see in the chat there were some questions coming in about if you had received assistance previously. You can in fact apply again. In our previous rounds, the amount that we were giving was far less. It was a max of $4,000. So you can actually apply again, and you would be eligible for an additional $8,000 unless your income is extremely low and below 30% AMI, then you would be eligible for even more.
Okay.
And if they applied for this round and got some money and then still need more, how does that work?
So at this point, they would not be eligible to reapply yet. When we get to the second tranche of money, the ERA 2, they would be eligible to reapply. We have some details to work out, so stay tuned, but you should be able to apply again.
If you're confused out there about the first program, the second program, the third program, which money comes from where and which you qualify, you're not alone. That's why we're here. That's why we're confused. We're working through layers of rules, and that's why we're here to help. Don't get overwhelmed by it being difficult. There's nothing more difficult than losing your housing through the eviction process. So please reach out to us. We will help you. And these good people here are here to help you. Some of it we might be able to overcome. Some of it is just going to be difficult, but don't let the confusing part of it be a turnoff.
Okay, and if you are having any kind of difficulty, please don't wait till the last minute. Apply now because the process takes a while. So don't wait till you have a red and white notice on your door from the sheriff. If you know your rent is behind, apply now. Start getting, get your ducks in order. Get your ducks in a row. And so you won't have to wait till the 11th hour and be sitting on pins and needles. Apply now. Just to say that the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs is here to answer questions. So please call 311 or contact ulta.intake@montgomerycountymd.gov. And we will get back to you. We usually call people back the same day. I know they tell you that we'll contact you in 48 hours, but we usually contact you by the end of the day, by the close of business. And if we call you the next day, it's because we called you back and we couldn't get you. And so we'll call you the next day, but we always call back. We have one of the best reply records in the county.
Rosie, let me address some question that came into the chat that maybe you can help me with. Is there a requirement that the land, and maybe Amanda knows this too, is there a requirement that if a landlord is moving to evict, that they have to notify the tenant about the resources available to them, to the tenant? I'm not sure that the landlord has to do
No, the
anything.
landlord
I think
doesn't
only
have
the
that
county
obligation.
and the sheriff's department does that.
No, the landlord does not have that as an obligation. So please call landlord tenant and we will inform you of what your rights are. And you can also contact the help organizations and they will tell you as well.
Now, I can tell you that the Renters Alliance has dealt with this over the years and we are still pushing it, but we believe that it is right that if a landlord is going to evict a tenant, that he or she should be obligated to communicate that action to county or municipal authorities. We have seen cases where someone could have been prevented from eviction, where there was county money or Tacoma Park money or Gaithersburg money or Rockville money that could have gone to prevent an eviction, usually in most cases, a very tragic situation where somebody was in a hospital or didn't know what to do or whatever. And there were resources available. And had the property manager or the landlord contacted a government authority to let them know that they were going to take this action, someone could have come in and intervened and prevented it. But that law does not exist. So get involved with the Renters Alliance and we will continue to push these laws. Rosie.
Okay, so until that happens, call landlord tenant and we'll be glad to answer your questions and we'll try to help you to the extent we can. And refer you to HHS and whoever is available to assist you, because one thing that Montgomery County is dedicated to is preventing evictions, preventing homelessness. Nobody in the county wants to see anybody on the street. And we do our very, very best. All the help agency, all the government agencies, we do our very, very best to prevent it. So please give us a call and we'll do all we can to stop it. In my code enforcement hat, code is doing inspections now. So if you call and you say something's broken or whatever, code will come out and look at it. And they do, so they are doing their inspections, and please comply and let them in. And code will cite the landlord, but if you're out of order, code will cite you. So be careful when you call code. Make sure that you have done what you're supposed to do too.
So some examples of your vulnerability might be if you're calling about cockroaches all over your apartment and your kitchen looks like hell, they might cite the landlord, but they might cite you too. And then the landlord might come after you and say, hey, you know what? I got cockroaches in my apartment building because you're making it worse. On the other hand, this came up today with the Renters Alliance. Somebody had bed bugs in their apartment, and the landlord said they were going to charge them for the extermination of those bed bugs. And yet there were many bed bugs in this apartment complex. Rosie, do you want to talk about that?
Bed bugs. The landlord can only charge you for extermination if you are the only people who have those bed bugs. And if it's an apartment complex, that's highly unlikely. So if you report bed bugs, the landlord is obligated to check the units beside you, across from you, above you, and below you. If they're in the complex, if in your building, they can't charge you because they don't know where they came from. They don't know if you originated them or the people in the other units originated. And bed bugs are easy. You can walk past somebody's door and one of them jump on your pants. Now you have bed bugs. You don't know what happened or where they came from, or they might have been on the bus or anywhere. They're easy to transmit, sadly. And so the landlord cannot just charge you. If they try, call landlord tenant and file a complaint, and we'll let you know what your rights are regarding that. Because especially the multifamily, it's the landlord's obligation to exterminate. However, if you have bed bugs and the landlord says, okay, we're going to exterminate your unit, He's gonna give you a list of things you have to do. You're gonna have to put your clothes in plastic bag, black plastic bag. You're gonna have to take them and wash them in hot water. Move all your dishes down. If you do not comply with all the things he's telling you that you need to do
Reasonable
before they
things.
exterminate, then you are in violation. And he can go back and charge you then because you didn't do what you were supposed to do. So if he gives you a list of things to do, please do it. And don't call and say this is wrong and that is wrong. And then when they come, don't let them in. You have to let them fix it. If you report a problem, then you have to give the landlord a chance to repair it. You can't just say, well, I don't, he gets on my nerves and don't let him in, because now you're wrong. Now you can't say, well, we have mice. And then if the landlord comes to set traps, you say, well, I don't want him in my house. Then you're the problem, not the mice.
So there's a reasonable balance there that this is where the Renters Alliance is an independent nonprofit. We usually work with landlord, tenant, and code, but sometimes we want them to do more than we think than they want to do, or something that we think the renter might have more rights than might be described to them. But the operating principle here is what's reasonable. There are standards of practice in exterminating bed bugs and cockroaches and mice. There is a standard, which Rosie can talk about when maintenance can come into your apartment and with proper notice, and what that looks like, and what the balance is if scheduling is bad and not good for you for some justifiable reason. All of that should be reasonable, and what I call it the Judge Judy rule, for those of us who remember Judge Judy. What would she say? If you had to go to court and say, oh, well, I didn't want him to come in. Well, why? Because they gave me 24 hours notice on Thanksgiving, and I had family coming the next day and it wasn't an emergency. I mean, there are all kinds of very reasonable things to say. Could you come on Thursday when I'm home from work? I don't want to take a day off from work. Don't schedule something. I have valuables in the apartment. I don't want I want to be there when somebody comes in. There are justifiable reasons to create a negotiation. But at the end of the day, what Rosie says, if they're doing what they need to do in order to solve a problem, you don't want to be the obstacle.
And don't say, well, I can't do it between, why can't he come at 2:00? The landlord cannot control a contractor. If the landlord has hired a contractor to come and check your AC or some plumbing issue, and the plumber says, I'll be there between 9 and 3, he'll be there between 9 and 3. The landlord cannot make him come at 10 o'clock or 2:00. He has no control over that. And, contractors schedule themselves. Maybe they schedule something at 9 that they thought would take 15 minutes and it ended up taking 2 hours. And so they don't get to you till 12 o'clock. The landlord is not responsible for that. Nor can he, he just can't do that. He can't say, you can't go and tell the landlord, well, if you can't come between 10 and 12, I'm not going to let you in. You are now the obstacle, not the landlord. So you have to work with the landlord if the contractors are just not on that tight a schedule.
But we've also seen notices that say, we're going to bring in inspectors that are going to be between Tuesday and Thursday, somewhere between 9 and 5. That's a little wide. So, there's a balance.
So we can work on it, but you have to be reasonable, and they do have to give you 24 hours notice. And if you have an objection, for whatever your objection is, you do have the right to say no. But you need to make sure your objection's valid, because then you're running the risk of being in breach of lease. That's all for me.
Rosie, can you go back over security deposits and normal wear and tear?
Okay. Security deposits. The landlord has 45 days. If once you leave, the landlord has 45 days to return your security deposit plus interest, or send you an itemized list of damages that are being claimed against the security deposit and any remaining monies or not, if there are any. And if he fails to do that, then he forfeits the right to retain your money. But you have an obligation to leave a forwarding address, or make sure that the post office has a forwarding address for you, so that if something is sent, you'll get it. Because if you don't tell the landlord where you're going, the law says he can send it to your last known address, which is where you moved from. So if you move and you don't tell him where you went, and he sends it to where you were, he met his obligation under the law. He sent it to your old house. If you didn't get it, that's your fault, because you didn't put in your forward. So he can't be held liable for that. And normal wear and tear is somewhat subjective, but we have a handbook online, and we actually just updated it a little. So that should be on in about a week. And basically, you have to leave the place broom clean. Vacuum the carpet, clean it up, make sure all the cabinets are empty. Clean the bathroom, clean the toilet, clean the tub, clean the refrigerator, make sure it's empty, wipe it out. It doesn't have to be immaculate so the next person can move in. That's not your job, but it shouldn't be nasty, because he can charge you for that. And if he has to do just a normal clean, because he has to clean it anyway, even if you left it clean, he has to go through and have it cleaned for the next person. But if they have to pay extra for that cleaning, they can charge that extra to you.
So some of the things that we've seen are landlords who give you a list of damages that you're not responsible for, and a list of costs for those damages that they just make up. So,
and if you file a complaint with the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs, we will investigate that. We ask for all the receipts, and we will call the contractor and verify that receipt. And some stuff, we can just look at it and say, no, you can't charge for that. That's not the tenant's responsibility.
So they can't give you a letter that says, we think that the carpet replacement's going to be $800. No, they actually have to make the repair, itemize the damage, repair it, and then put a list that says it costs this much to fix it.
It has to be for actual costs incurred, and it has to be prorated. So if you moved in and your stove was working, but it was about 10 years old, and you stayed there for 5 years, and when you left, the stove was dying, and so now he has to buy a new stove, he can't charge you anything, because the average life of a stove is like 14 years. So it's time to replace the stove. The stove has died its natural death. That cannot be passed on to you. Major appliances are the responsibility of the landlord unless you do something to them. So if you break the ice maker, they can charge you to fix it. But if the motor in the refrigerator dies, you cannot be charged for that. So if you have questions about what is or isn't normal wear and tear, please call the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs, and we'd be glad to go over it with you.
And also, what is actual damage versus landlord just trying to charge you something? I've seen complaints where they're trying to charge you for renovating the kitchen after you've gone. Not your responsibility.
Yeah, because sometimes they're going to sell it. Yeah, they're going to sell a house.
Yeah.
They do all these upgrades, and then they say you left it poor. No, you didn't.
Right.
Please do a walkthrough inspection when you move in, and do a walkthrough inspection when you move out. We have a form. It's a free form. It's on our website. It's in the Landlord Tenant Handbook. It'll save you a whole lot of aggravation. A whole lot.
And take pictures.
Take pictures when you move in, and take pictures when you move out. If you know it's a spot on the carpet over in the corner, I know it may not be bothering you, but take a picture of it so it has a date that this spot was here on December 5th, 2019, when you moved in. So when you move out on December 1st, 2022, you won't be charged for that spot. It does make a difference because it's the only proof you have of the condition when you came.
I always say this to renters because many don't believe this. You're in a business relationship with your landlord. You may think the landlord was just the nicest person in the world when you moved in. You may work with a property manager who's just lovely. You're there for 10, 15 years, and now you're on your fourth property manager at a new company. It's a business relationship. So you have to conduct yourself, even though you should be civil and polite and friendly if you can be, But always remember that I don't know too many landlords, I don't know any actually, who will let you move in and say your rent's going to be whatever and give you a handshake. They put it in writing, in a lease, and say, this is what you owe me. In case there's a disagreement down the road, we have a contract. That's why there are also laws that say, here's what you have to do, here's what you don't have to do in the law. So there's contract, government contract, civil law, and the actual lease itself. So conduct yourself that way. You have things that you're entitled to, you have responsibilities, and the same thing when you buy the car and sell the car, you should know what it looked like when you bought it, or rent a car, put it that way. What the damages were when you rented it, what the damages were, if there were any, when you gave it back. Otherwise, you're going to be in a dispute that's going to be difficult to get out of. Rosie, it comes in the chat, and we have it often enough. Tell us about mold and enforcement of mold. How does that work?
Mold is tricky because mold is everywhere. Mold is all around you. When it gets moist, when it rains, stuff you get, it's moldy. There's mold everywhere. And I don't care where you go and whose house you go and there's some mold somewhere. But if it gets to be excessive, or, and it's growing, or mushrooms are growing through your floor, that's excessive mold. The problem with mold is there's no standard. There's no federal, state, or local standard for how much mold is too much mold. And some people are just very sensitive to it. It might be just a little bit, but if you have a mold sensitivity, it's going to make you sick. So call code enforcement and they can come out and look at it. And code can only cite what they see. So if you smell mold, code can't really do anything because they can only cite the landlord for what they can see. If they can't see the mold, they can't say anything.
But understand there are certain relationships about mold. Aside from what code can enforce what they see, there's a relationship between moisture and leaky pipes and mold. If you've got leaky pipes or you have wetness coming through the ceiling or through the walls, you need to first, obviously, as in all complaints, tell the property manager or the landlord, this is a problem, please fix it. If they don't do it in a reasonable period of time or adequately fix it, and you've given them all the ability to do that and reasonable time to do that, file a code complaint. Let code come out and start a paper track record that says that this is a problem. And maybe the source of the mold, which is always going to be moisture in your apartment in some way or other, that's what feeds it, it's a plant, can be addressed. So look at the relationship of things. If you have filters in your convectors that have not been changed in months or years, and you ask the property manager to change it because you think it's moldy, they should do that. And if they don't, then you should file a code complaint. There are ways to address this.
Always, for your protection, put it in writing. If you send an email, keep that email. Send the landlord an email saying this is such and such a thing, so you'll have a record. Because a lot of times you'll say, well, I told the landlord 5 times that this was a problem. And then when you call the landlord will say, well, she never said anything to me. Put it in writing. Please put it in writing. You save yourself a whole lot of aggravation. And if you have something in your lease, especially in older places where they say, put ventilation, if your bathroom is, say, crack a window or whatever, do it. From time to time, you don't have to leave your window open in your bathroom, but from time to time, you need to air it out. Do that. That'll help keep the mold down. And I think that was about it for me.
Rosie, always helpful to explain the difference between the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs and code. And I'll put up the 2 different complaint links in the chat while you're doing that.
Okay. Landlord tenant enforces tenants' rights. So does the landlord have to give me notice before he comes in my house? What does the landlord have to tell me about my security deposit? That's landlord tenant. Can I be charged a fee in excess of 5% if I'm late? That's a landlord tenant issue. If you have mice, if you have roaches, if your pipes are leaking, if the AC is not working, that's code enforcement. That's something that needs to be repaired. That's housing code enforcement. And a lot of times we work together. because maybe the landlord isn't fixing things, and then you're filing the complaint because maybe he's not treating you well. And so a lot of times we work together, we're in the same office, and so we have the same mutual client. But code enforcement is responsible for repairs. We're responsible for enforcing tenants' rights.
Okay, getting there, about ready to post. I put the code enforcement link in there, and this is the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs link with information about that office and a complaint form. So
Okay.
go there if you need help. Again, info@rentersalliance.org if you have an issue. We work with the county government all the time, as Rosie knows, and we will help you to navigate, to get the support that you deserve, and give you advice. Sometimes we tell tenants they've got a good case. Sometimes we tell you, hey, don't bother them. You don't have a case. We'll help you a little bit, but they're busy. So we'll be able to decipher which is which. We're not lawyers, but we are kind of like paramedics. So we can tell you when you got a broken leg. We can tell you when all you need to do is take 2 aspirin and put your feet up on a chair. So we'll tell you when you need to go to the doctor and when you don't. That much we do know. So please use us as your aid in the landlord-tenant world. That's what we're here for. Let's see, is there any other questions or concerns in the chat? If the walls are being plastered, as this last question comes in, one of the problems we see with the mold issue, and you should be on top of this as a consumer in an apartment, if there's water coming through or mold coming through the wall, and the landlord's remedy for this is to send in the poor maintenance guy to paint it over.
Yeah, because that's what they'll do. They'll clean it with bleach and then they'll paint it.
They'll paint it over.
About a month, it'll be right back.
And it comes right back. You need to file a code complaint. First of all, you need to say, hey, don't do that. That's not solving the problem. You
And
take a picture of that mold. This is the problem. There's water coming through. Plastering it over, painting it over, washing it off is a temporary fix that doesn't solve the problem. And as many people who are sensitive to mold know, that even if you can't see it, you can still be affected by it. And by the time you do see it, it's really getting to you. It's not a sufficient solution to the problem. And we would recommend that you photograph the problem, communicate with the office, with the landlord or the property manager, see that they get to it properly and address the source of the moisture. And if they don't do that in a reasonable, appropriate manner, call or file a complaint with the Office of Code Enforcement.
Okay. And code enforcement is there, and we're there. Alta.intake@montgomerycountymd.gov is our email address, and we will answer you.
Okay. Then let me, if there are no other questions or concerns, and I don't see any, the same thing with cracks in the walls. You're not expected to live with cracks in your walls. The apartment is supposed to be whole. The walls aren't supposed to fall in. They're supposed to fix it. If they don't fix it, call or come file a code complaint. Same thing with your floors are supposed to be solid. It's one thing to have a creaky floor in an old apartment. You can ask them to fix it. If they don't fix it, it could be a code complaint. We expect all tenants to be reasonable people. There isn't a millionaire's mansion on the Potomac in Montgomery County that doesn't occasionally have cockroaches and mice, a leaky faucet, or whatever. The difference is they can fix it on their own timetable. We have to rely on, this is my apartment, we have to rely on property management and maintenance to do it. So, but to say that you've got this problem and that therefore they're being irresponsible would be a little bit too much. If you make your complaint, they don't get to it, it takes a little while. You're not the only person in the building, but they get to it and then they fix it appropriately. If they don't, your resource is to go to the county and seek enforcement. You have that right, and that resource is available. We pay millions of dollars for the county to have this resource. So utilize it if you need to. All right. Any last remarks from Amanda Harris, if you're still with us? Anything you'd like to say before we go?
If you are struggling and you have not applied, please apply. Go to court and be patient.
Thanks, Amanda. Rosie?
Again, if you are summoned to court, go to court. If you have questions, call 311 and ask for the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs. And if you are having problems in your unit, ask for Housing Code Enforcement. We're here to help.
So the Renters Alliance will work with you on anything having to do with landlord-tenant renter issues. Most of our work is doing outreach in apartment communities, letting people know about town halls like this, about the resources that HHS is offering, the support that the Department of Housing and Community Affairs can offer. We help provide advice, non-legal, official legal advice to tenants. We're not lawyers, about what their options are, what they should do in certain dispute situations. And we've been doing this for over a decade now. So we have some experience, not just me. We have volunteers and a board and staff that work with us. And we also come and do organizing for tenants associations. So if you think that that's going to be valuable in your community, and it's always valuable, we can help you set something like that up. And we, of course, work individually with tenants that have individual disputes and try to get those resolved. And then we also do some policy advocacy. And there are still a number of legislative initiatives that we'd like to see pass in Maryland and in Montgomery County. Immediately, it's this extension of the Rent Stabilization Bill, Bill 3021, which will be voted on Tuesday. I earlier put in the chat the links to the Montgomery County Council. If they don't hear from you, they won't care. So you need to contact them and say, hey, this is important, not just for me, but for my neighbors and for the renter community in Montgomery County, which is now upwards of 40% of county residents, not just individuals, but families with children and people who pay taxes and invest in the political, social, and economic life of Montgomery County. We also, as mentioned before, we are pushing legislation that has not been proposed yet, but we want it to happen, that would require landlords and property managers who are licensed in Montgomery County to be trained and certified as property managers and landlords. You have to get a license to drive a car. How you can manage a 100, 200, 500,000 home apartment complex and not have any training in how to do so, it doesn't seem like a good thing. It would help a lot of disputes, prevent a lot of disputes, and perhaps even begin employing some best practices like one that was mentioned earlier. Wouldn't it be a good idea for a property manager who is being compelled to file an eviction for a tenant to also alert county government that this person could use their help? So that's another thing that we're pushing. And one of our board members, Delegate Janelle Wilkins, is pushing a statewide bill, which we've supported for years, that would require a landlord to have to state a justifiable reason not to renew a lease. So in places like Washington, D.C., and New York, and New Jersey, and Seattle, and San Francisco, other places, they have what's called just cause eviction law. That means that your lease will automatically renew each year, absent a justifiable reason not to. You still have to pay your rent. You still have to abide by the rules of the community. And occasionally, if a landlord decides, especially a small landlord, to take your apartment off the market, then those are justifiable reasons. Or they're going to tear down the apartment and build new. There could be justifiable business reasons. But absent those, if the landlord is going to lease the apartment in perpetuity to kick out a family or evict a family or an individual, there should be a good reason for that. Right now, as Rosie Mcrae Moody mentioned, a landlord could give you, I believe, 90 days notice and say, we're not going to renew the lease. And there's no defense. You could have been in the building for 20 years. You could have moved in when you're 60 and now you're 80 years old. And they've decided, they don't have to tell you why. It's usually for a bad reason, like you wanted to form a tenants association, or you complained about the vermin in the basement, or some other, or maybe they just thought they could get in higher paying renters and they don't want any senior citizens in the building anymore because they feel bad about raising their rent. Whatever. They don't have to say why. And we think that they should have to say why, and it should be a good reason. These laws have not passed yet, and they will certainly not pass without your support. So with that, you have been at the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. Our town halls are on average every couple of weeks, twice a month. We have another one November 10th on Wednesday. We also have an upcoming governor's forum for the 2 remaining governor candidates who did not come to the governor's forum we had September 21st. We'll post that in our newsletters, and you'll get that information. If you're on this Renter Town Hall, you'll get that information from us. And we'll also be celebrating our annual Building Community Celebration on December 10th. And this time we'll be honoring the Attorney General, Brian Frosch, who has been a champion for renters for many years. So with that, again, thank you, Amanda Harris, Rosie Mcrae Moody, and all of you who attended tonight, and good night.